everybody. I am here today with Rachael. She owns a company called Parenting from Mars, and she is a parent coach. So welcome, Rachael. Thanks for coming and chatting with us today.
Hey, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. So let's start off. Tell us a little bit about you, sort of your personally about you, and then your journey of how you got here and how you started your company.
Yeah, sure. So I am a former preschool teacher. So I started my career in education with the nonprofit organization Teach for America. So I taught in Chicago on the South Side, 3 to 5 year olds for a few years. And then after that, transitioned to working for the national nonprofit for a little over a decade. And all along that journey, I had my 3 kids. So my kids right now today, so they're 9, 6, and 3. And got to a point about a year ago, a little over a year ago, where, just the challenges of day-to-day life, caring for children, caring for a home, showing up at work full time, I started to feel like I really needed to find something that I was just really passionate about. I'd always been passionate about kids and education, but given where I was in my motherhood, it felt like I needed a shift. And so it's like, where does my passion lie? What am I really good at? And that was parenting, which is like kind of a parenting enthusiast, right?
Good for
and
you.
so I was that person that people would call, friends and family, who would say, I've got this thing going on with my toddler. Like, what do I do? Or what would you do in this situation? Or how do I navigate, X? And so all those things kind of converged, and it just made sense for me to expand how I was able to be of service and support others in their parenthood, in their motherhood. So that's how this came to be.
That's amazing. Okay. You got me stuck on the South Side. So tell me a little bit about that and your experience of being a preschool teacher, especially on the South Side. What did that look like? And then did you have kids while you were a preschool teacher, like during all of that?
I didn't have kids while I was teaching. So I taught in the Gage Park community. My children and families, absolutely wonderful. Like, love them, think of them fondly. I'm still in touch with a few parents, to this day. And what was so just eye-opening to me and so new to me was this world of just like child development and the massive amount of just growth and brain development that happens from the 0 to 3, really 0 to 5 years. And so getting really immersed in that from just an education standpoint, and as a teacher, understanding how to support my children given where they were developmentally was really eye-opening in terms of understanding just the human experience. I didn't have kids when I was teaching. And so I often think about how I would be a different teacher now, right? Like if I was in the classroom. And, I was young. I was, in my early 20s. A lot of the things that I did in my classroom were really focused around, obviously educating the children, but like classroom management, how to get through transitions and, behaviors that we wanted to encourage, behaviors that we wanted to discourage. And when I reflect on the experience today, I think a lot about how I could have better leveraged my relationship and my connection with my kids, with my students, to have a similar result as relying on rewards and punishment systems. I give myself a lot of grace. I was young and didn't have kids. I was like, what's a 3-year-old? Are they potty trained? I didn't know. Yeah, sure. But it's really interesting looking back now, given my own just experience of motherhood.
I think also when you're sort of going back, or when you're not a mother, when you're a teacher, you kind of go by the book, right? You're like, okay, well, I learned this and I learned this and I learned this. Here's a little bit of my experience with friends or family, or if you babysat or nanny or whatever. But then when you do have your own kids, you're just, I think, more empathetic to the kids, but then also to the parents. And I know, sort of similar to that, when I was a nanny, I did not have kids. And I just was by the book, and I was very much like, okay, when your child turns 1, you take away their pacifier, you take away their bottle, we're going to transition. And I always did it in a nice way, and this, helping the children as much as I could and going down the right path with that. But as a mother now, I'm like, it is survival. Yeah. I'm like, you have that pacifier till you're 3. I don't know. It's just different.
We were all a perfect parent before we became parents, right? Like, I was perfect 100%. Before I had kids. I knew exactly what I was going to do. Oh God.
It's down the drain now. Now you're like, I'm drinking a glass of wine and you're just like on the floor eating dirt, and I don't care because you're alive, and that's all I need at this point. Especially when you have 3. With your 3rd, you're kind of like, it's cool. It's okay,
I look at a lot of things, to your point with like the pacifier or, potty learning or potty training and, sleep and things like that. I remember, being in the trenches of that, just reading every book and following all the rules. And I'm like, I'm a good student. Like you just tell me what to do and I can do it. And then by my 3rd, you're right. I was like, if he wants to go to the bathroom, he'll use the toilet, right? Or like, he can have a bottle until he's 3. Like, I don't care. And it like it all worked out. Like, it's all fine.
It always does somehow, right? But I think to your point of kiddos from ages of, being born until they're 5, that is a huge developmentally, like, that whole time is just the most important years. So tell us a little bit about what specifically, maybe from 0 to 3, what specifically, why is that age important? And then what should you be instilling in your kids at that age too?
So brain development is just so rapid during that time. Growth, obviously, in general, right? Like, you think about your little baby that you take home from the hospital to where they are at 3, it's so rapid. Nurturing that growth from a lot of different angles is what's really important. When we think about brain development, nurturing our relationship with our child is what's really critical during that time. We also think about just the research and around communication development too, and how Dana Susskind, she's actually I think from the University of Chicago, wrote a book called 30 Million Words. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a great read for anyone with really young kiddos. But it's all about the gap between number of words heard from children from low-income communities compared with their higher income peers. And so there's a gap in that, in how much they're being spoken to and how many words they're hearing from that 0 to 3 age frame, and what that does in terms of setting them up for, or not, for academic success once they enter the preschool years. And so looking at brain development in that regard is really important. But then, as I also mentioned, from just a relationship standpoint, building the groundwork for a really secure attachment, and being mindful of our attachment with our children is really critical. And so when I say attachment, what I mean is really the relationship and the quality of the relationship that we have with our children and how they experience us as parents. And so a secure attachment looks like, our children knowing that they are seen and understood, that they are safe. And that safety means a couple different things, right? Like, obviously physically safe, but also emotionally safe, right? In our presence. And being soothed when they're dysregulated or when they're upset. And so when those things are in place, then a secure attachment develops in our children.
That's amazing. Because you don't, and of course, when you have kids, you're, for you and I, and mine are all old and teenagers now, but that is just that early on, just the nurturingness of it and the talking and communicating and options and tone and all of those things are just so critical. And actually, as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, okay, I did not screw up my kids forever, because those 0 to 3, that I was like, that was my sweet spot.
Yes, of course. But you know what I'll also add? It is a sweet spot, right? And it is incredibly important. But what I also would want parents to hear, if maybe they're kind of coming into this space, even a little later, and they're like, you know what? Like, I was really stressed out as a mom of young kids. And, I've had parents say to me, like, I've yelled at my baby. I wasn't proud of it, but I yelled at my baby. And I like, because they were colicky or because I was stressed out. And what I would want parents to know, first of all, like, you're not alone, and give yourself grace. Yes, those early years are really important, but our brain, there's something called neuroplasticity, right? And that just means that our brain can change, and it's capable of change. And it is never too early, and it's never too late to start, really nurturing our relationship with our kids, even our adult children someday. There might be moments where we need to repair.
For sure. And that gives me goosebumps, actually, when you say that, because it is true. My kids are 17, 16, and almost 14. And, I have learned over the years just that repair piece, even if it's relationships with your partner or if it's with your kids. And, and maybe you can speak more about this, but I've read and learned over the years that, if there is conflict or something happens, or if, you yelled at your kid or whatever it might be, just repair, or even, saying I'm sorry and that shouldn't have happened. And how does that make you feel? And to repair. And then even with your partner, and I'm divorced, so like I've just learned a lot about now all the repair and all the things, but I know having your children see you repair with your partner, like let's say you yell at each other, whatever the case might be, and for them to see you repairing that as a couple is also just so important to kids.
Yeah, there's a way too that I like to look at repair, which might be kind of new for folks, but it's sort of recently new to me. But thinking about it as almost a method of validation, right? When you repair with your child, you are validating their experience of what happened. When we ignore it, when we sweep it under the rug, when we think it just blew over, then our kids are sort of left to figure out the experience on their own. And what that could lead to could lead to some very like internal looking stories about it. I'm a bad kid, or I can't figure this out, or I shouldn't, I need to be more careful when I talk to mom or talk to dad or whatever it is. And so when we repair, we say, no, what you experienced then made sense. I would be upset too. That's on me. And I take responsibility for this. And here's what I'm doing to do better in the future. Or here's what I'm committing to, moving forward. So thinking of it in that way too is just really important for how they develop as a person, and like their inner self-talk and their inner sort of, self-worth.
Yeah, definitely. And that neuroplasticity that you're talking about too, I often, think back, and I was like, oh, and I'm sure some parents can say the same. They're like, oh, that was a tough time, like you just mentioned earlier. And for me, I know that when I got divorced, that was a tough time. And I look back and I was like, oh my God, I don't even know how I freaking got through that. But I have said to my kids since, which this has only been 4 years now, but I said to my kids, and I was like, I'll say little comments. I'll say, woo, I was a hot mess back then. And Maeve, my daughter, is like, why do you say that? And I'm like, well, because I was kind of a hot mess back then. I'm like, she's like, Mom, we didn't know. Like, we didn't know. We couldn't tell. You didn't talk to us differently. You always were smiling, happy, and engaged and all the things. And I'm like, good. Because, you know, as a parent, I think you can be really hard on yourself and you can go through some of these challenges in life and you're like, oh my gosh, the shame of I'm not being a good parent. But really, you know, and my kids are old enough to like validate me, which is great. But, you know, as a parent, it's like there's times where, you know, you're not going to be perfect and it's going to be okay and your kids will be okay.
Right. Absolutely. We are incredibly resilient as beings. And if, you know, I would offer to parents that if you are thinking about these things, you're doing just fine, right? Like if you're in
That's
the
so
space
true.
of I'm trying to be a good parent, you probably are.
Yeah. If you're worried about fucking up everything, you're probably not.
Exactly.
I mean, you know.
Exactly.
Okay, well, tell us a little bit about your kids. So, of course, I was thinking about this morning where I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to talk with Rachael, and all kids are so different. And I'm curious just what your kids are like and how have they helped you with the journey of becoming a parenting coach and sort of, or how do they challenge you or inspire you? Tell me a little bit about that.
Such a good question. So I have a Pisces, a Taurus, and a Scorpio. So if anyone's familiar with those personalities,
And you're Cancer.
I'm a Cancer.
Right?
Yes. So,
okay, I am too.
That's fine. We get along. So I have girl, boy, boy, and yeah, my daughter came out like ready to go. Right? Like from the moment she was born, it was so funny. I would remember, you know, like being with her in public and seeing like other little babies and everyone was like cradling their like little newborn. And mine was like up here, like on my head, like looking around. And I'm like, I've never held a baby like that. Like she won't do it.
Yeah.
Like she is up. She is ready to go. She was ready to eat. She ate all the time to like my poor boobs. It was just,
exactly.
you know, trouble sleeping. And it was a really hard first year for me as a mom. I was diagnosed with postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety around the 8-month mark. So that's a long time to go without, you know, really having any intervention, any support. Not that my husband wasn't supportive, but just any, you know, kind of medical support or care.
Yes.
And so that honestly was probably part of a catalyst too of, you know, I said that I'm a parenting enthusiast, right? Like parenting is something that I love. And I really started to kind of dive into understanding more about the experience that I was having as a new mom, and sort of became almost like a hobby, right? To me, where I'm exploring different styles, different parenting approaches and things like that. And so I have her to thank for that interest, right? And those challenges. And then with my second born, my son, he very different, like came out completely like he was like, I'm going to sleep for 2 days. And I was like, what? Like, give me the syringe.
Like, what's wrong with you?
I need to feed him. Like, why isn't he eating? And the nurses were like, he's fine. He's fine. But, you know, just a very different personality, very different baby. And it was interesting. So, you know, I said how my daughter liked to eat all the time. I breastfed her exclusively for a year and then continued to just like kind of on demand up until she was like almost 3. Like I was pregnant with my second and I was like, this is great. Like nursing a toddler is so fun. And I love it. I don't know if anyone nursing a toddler is.
I was exactly the same. I nursed while I was pregnant with my second too. I was like,
it's fine.
We say it's fine. So,
and then thought that I was going to have a very similar, you know, kind of experience with my son. And then he, you know, wasn't gaining weight and he was dehydrated. It was a whole thing. And he was on formula by 8 weeks. And so I had these like two very different experiences of like, wow, I was like breastfeeding an almost 3-year-old to like, now we're exclusive, bottle feeding and formula with, my new baby. And my third son, he followed the same. I was like, formula's amazing. I was like, get on that.
I've got some freedom.
Yeah. And honestly, like both experiences or all the experiences, I'm so grateful for, because it just gives me so much more perspective. And I can look at them now and I can be like, you all are great. And like, that didn't define you and it didn't define me.
Yeah.
And there's so much more to, parenting than like being a food source for your child. And, it was really kind of a lesson in like, there's only so much that you can control and so much you can do, and you're enough, whatever the circumstances like may be. Like who you are as a person, as their mother, as their caregiver is enough. And that's what they need, right? They need a healthy mom.
Yep.
They need a mom. They need food. They need someone attending to their needs, right? Like that safety, security, that soothing presence. So yeah, I've learned so much from each of them, and it, even those really early experiences have kind of shaped, the mom that I am now, as a parenting coach, but also just as like their mom.
Yep, definitely. And I suppose from, having the two perspectives of having one child who you're like, okay, I'm doing all the things right. I'm nursing this baby. She's alert and awake and going, and I'm still attentive to her. But meanwhile, you were suffering and you probably thought you were a terrible mom because you're just depression and anxiety and all that stuff. And you're trying to do all the right things that, we're told. But then you figured that out and then had the perspective of, you know what? I'm healthy. I'm taking care of myself. And if I'm bottle feeding my baby with formula, you're still winning. Like, you're still doing a great job. And I feel like so many moms have that guilt of, I'm not doing enough, or, and I don't think that ever really goes away, because I'll even say to my kids every once in a while, I'm like, well, I'm going out tonight. Are you guys sure you're okay by yourselves? I mean, they drive and they're like, Mom, we don't need you. I'm like, are you sure? I feel really bad that I'm not home. And they're like, why? Yeah. So it's on us. Like, we put that on ourselves. So as a parenting coach, how would you say if a mom came to you and she said, I have this guilt, whether it be I'm now feeding my baby formula, or I'm a working mom, and because I get that a lot in what I do. These parents work 50 hours a week and have a lot of guilt about that. How do you get through helping moms with that guilt?
Yeah. So I think mom guilt is a really interesting topic, because I think it sort of has its own like brand now, right? Like, we're all familiar with the term like mom guilt, and I think in some ways it can be, obviously really debilitating, right? And like prevent us from enjoying other aspects of who we are in our life. But in other ways, like, there's almost just like this like kind of weird badge of like, you have to have some degree of mom guilt, or like, are you a good mom? Like, I don't agree with that, but I think that
me either. I hate
kind
that.
of exists too. And, oftentimes I will, I had this conversation, a little while ago with a client around like, is it actually guilt that we're feeling? In my coaching, I do a lot of like feelings work, right? Like we work to really like sink into the feeling, to feel it, to process it. And sometimes it's not guilt. Sometimes it's shame. Sometimes it's worry. Sometimes it's anxiety. Sometimes like it's something else. And so I think that really getting clear on what the sensation is, what the feeling is, and, working through some ways to make sense of it, where it's coming from, and to make some connections, so that we can then better manage how to process it. But I think there's a lot of like, when we do, if you're out with like your girlfriends or something and you're like, oh, I'm feeling so guilty. There's a lot of like, don't feel guilty. Let me name all the reasons why you shouldn't. And like, that's not helpful either. Right? Like, okay.
You're just getting rid of that feeling that you're supposed to be acknowledging and sitting in and, being okay with.
Yeah. So, so I look at that, in a couple of different ways, but, that processing piece is really important, and getting a little bit more familiar with what the sensation is and where maybe some roots from where that's bubbling up.
Yeah. Well, it sounds to me like you're coach/therapist, which is great. I had a therapist for a while, for a few years, and she'd be like, I'm like, well, I feel sad. And she's like, good. You need to sit in that now. And I'm like, I don't want to sit in that. And she's like, no, you're going to sit in it and you're just going to be okay with it. And you're going to acknowledge it and all the things. And I was always like, no, I really don't want to do that. But now in hindsight, I'm looking back and I'm like that. I write her often and I'm like, I think about you every day. Like you changed my life. Like you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. But okay. So on that topic of sort of, what you do in helping parents out, tell us about your workshops. I know you have a 90-day workshop. Tell us a little bit about that and sort of the steps and how that works.
Yeah. So my 90-day program is grounded in getting parents to a place where they are having just so much more confidence in their ability to show up in their parenthood. And so that can look like different things for different people. It's one of the reasons why I love one-on-one coaching versus doing like this course or like this ebook or whatever it is. I think that we grow and heal in relationship with others. And so, the things that I provide are first and foremost, just like a lot of like information, right? Like a lot of like, I'm going to take the things from like these books and this research study and, this, thought that some great therapist came up with or whatever it is. I'm going to curate that. It's all based in science and research. And I'm going to deliver you these learning experiences every week. And so you're learning, and then you're also getting some journaling prompts and some reflection as you're going through that. Then once a week, so that's just like on a weekly basis, you're doing that on your own time. And then once a week, we'll connect for an hour, sometimes more depending on what the person wants or needs, but we'll connect for about an hour and do that coaching. So I'll answer any questions from that, but it's not a time for me to be like, let me tell you how to be a parent. It's time for the client to come to me and say, here's what went really well, but like this one thing happened. I really want to talk through it. And we take the time to explore it, to process it, to identify patterns, to dig into some mindsets that might be, holding us back, to offer a different path, and then to do the strategies and the tools and the things, right? So you're not just getting what, Instagram will give you in a 15-second reel of, hey, so if your child's hitting, you need to do this, or instead of saying it this way, you need to say it that way. Because it's geared at giving you something very, very quick and catching your attention, it's often incomplete, and it doesn't cover, it's not a one size fits all, right? So we look at how to integrate into your family specifically based off of where your kids are developmentally, where you are in your journey, where your triggers and struggles are. So it's super individualized. And then I also let folks within like some time frames, like get in touch with me through the Voxer app. So you can like send me a voicemail and be like, I'm in my closet. Nice. I need, I just whatever, like, what do I do? Right. And then we can have a little bit more of like if that makes sense, a little bit more of like a
Yes.
ongoing.
Got it. And then when you do these workshops, Rachel, are they in a group? Or are they individual for each parent?
Yeah. So
Or
the 90-day program is one-on-one, right? So it's like just us. I also will do, I'll do sort of a similar group program as well. I'm actually like kind of beta testing that right now and building
Awesome.
some putting some groups together for that experience. But it's a very similar framework, but just think you're in it in community with other parents. And so there's less of a like one-on-one deep dive, more of a community sort of like support, if that makes more sense for where you are.
That's awesome. And then if you do end up going through the workshop as a community and kind of just are with our other parents, do the families have the opportunity to connect with the other parents in the group as well?
Yeah, I mean, as long as there's consent, right, on all parties, then absolutely. I think that a lot of times, I mean, we're all familiar with sort of the isolation or the loneliness that can come, in parenthood, in motherhood. Especially if there's struggle or if there's something that's going on that you feel like, gosh, everyone has this figured out and I don't, right? Which isn't true. Like if you're struggling, either someone else is probably struggling in the same way or has experienced it at some point. My husband would say, this was like when our babies were younger, I would be like, this, or bedtimes or something. And he'd be like, well, how is everybody else doing it? They're all doing it. I was like, first of all,
if they can do
famous last words, right? But I was like,
you're like, shut up.
Yeah. I was like, but they're not. Like, they're not. To assume that they are is the first mistake. And then the other funny thing that happened kind of in a similar time frame, I wanted to hire like a sleep consultant, like a sleep coach for my daughter who, was ready to run the world at 6 weeks. I wanted to hire a sleep coach, and I think he said something to me like, well, you read the book, like, can you do it? And I was like, didn't you read a book on how to make $1 million and we're not millionaires? He goes,
like, such a good point.
And he goes,
such a good point.
Yeah, you're right. Hire the coach. And
okay, good.
Like, again, I think that's just also to reiterate the point of like, we have so much information out there. There is a plethora of places that you can go to for, how to deal with this problem or how to parent your kids in this way or with, what approach, a certain approach or what have you. There's influencers to follow. There's courses to buy. I mean, there's me, right? You could do my program, right? Like I'm kind of part of it, but essentially I think that we can get to a place where we're drowning out a lot of the noise or a lot of the things that we're hearing when we're in isolation and when we're just like on our own, and to try to find, whether it's with me or somebody else, to be quite honest, but try to find like that community, that relationship that is going to get you to a place of reflection and integration and support. Because oftentimes the will to do it differently isn't enough. Like just waking up and deciding, I'm not going to yell today. For anyone who has ever been in a cycle of yelling, like it's not enough.
Well, I think a community too is so important, of finding, whether it's new friends or old friends, but people who have kiddos like the same. I think it's kind of necessary to have the kids the same age so that you can know that you're not alone, and what your child is doing or feeling or what you're doing or feeling is aligned with other people. And it's like, oh, good. Like other people are dealing with the same thing. All right. So you're dealing with that. How do you work through all of that and then get advice that way too? Because when you don't have, there's kind of this gap too. And I'm talking for people who are younger and have younger kids, but when you have your first baby, you kind of have this gap. I know for me, I had my first child when I was 26, and all my friends did not have kids. So it was kind of like, okay, now I need to go into this different group, find new friends who are more similar to what I'm going through. Because if I didn't have that, I don't know what I would have done, because you just feel so alone, you know?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
That
community is
resonates
important
with me
for
as
sure.
well. I was like one of the first ones. And
Yeah.
now, I look, I'll talk to friends and they'll be like, oh, I didn't know what you were going through. Right? They're like,
Oh
it's
my
like, it's
gosh.
fine. It's water under the bridge.
They're like, sorry we judged you for not going out
Yeah.
and getting a beer with us. We didn't realize how hard it
Yeah,
was.
exactly.
It's hard. Okay, tell us your, I guess, 3 top parenting tips. I guess sort of generally, because I know
yeah.
kids are all ages and all things. So generally, what are your 3 top tips for parents?
Yeah, so I would say, and these are definitely strategies, right? Like it takes some time to develop them, but the first would be make sense of how you were parented. And that's more than just saying, oh, I had a great childhood, I was fine. Like, it's more than that, right? And it's also doesn't mean you have to like hate on everything that went wrong, right? Like, 2 things can be true. You can say, I love my parents, I had a great childhood, but actually, now that I think about it, like, these things, had a real impact on me, good, bad, neutral, whatever. What Dr. Dan Siegel, who's someone I reference a lot in my program, called this is a coherent narrative. So it's building your own coherent narrative of your childhood. And it is actually one of the best predictors on whether or not you'll build a secure attachment with your children. So that's like kind of part of the work too, in building that attachment style. Number 2, curiosity. So we look at behavior so often as, I mentioned before, like, this is good behavior, this is bad behavior. I need to change this. I need to fix this. If it's misbehavior, for example. And what I would suggest parents do is, instead of jumping to how do I curb this behavior, come ask questions first. Why is this happening? All behavior is communication. There is something underneath. And so if we just address, the tip of the iceberg, and we're not looking at, where a behavior is kind of stemming from, and we're not addressing maybe an unmet need or an unlearned skill, then we're missing it.
That is such good advice, because it's easy just to get upset and be like, why are you doing that? Like, why would you do that? Where for all ages too, I think, from little to adult. I mean, where you're like, wow, I'm really upset about that. And then you think a little bit about it, and why are you upset about that? And it just, you're right, a curiosity, like figuring out where that actually comes from. That's good. I love that advice.
And then 3, and we talked a little bit about this, but repair. Just getting really good at repair. And, we talked about repairing with our children and why that's important, but let's also like repair with ourselves and offer ourselves grace and forgiveness before you can even like go into that type of repair conversation with your child. I would say there needs to be some like repair with yourself first.
Definitely.
And so practicing those 3 things, I think, just make for a really strong foundation in your parenting.
Yep. I think that goes across the board too, is like, first of all, that's all the best advice, but it can go with your kids. You can go with your relationship with your partner. It can go with relationship with anyone in your life, really. If you can have those 3 takeaways and actually use them. And earlier on, when you were talking about your workshop, it sounds like, you need to do the work. It's, I'll give you these tools, but ultimately you're the one who needs to do the work, which just in a general life statement is true for everybody and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. We are the only ones who can kind of impact our relationship with our kids, right? I talk to a lot of parents too who are like, well, what do I do if my co-partner's not on board? Or, what do I do if my co-parent's not on board? Or what do I do if my partner has a different parenting style than I do? Like, is this even going to work? Is it even worth going through all the work if someone's doing it differently? And the answer is yes, because what I said at the beginning, at least one parent with a secure attachment, right? At least one caregiver who develops that secure attachment with their child is what's necessary. And so you can only control your own, thoughts, behaviors, reactions. You cannot do that for anyone else. And so it's enough to just focus on your relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that totally makes sense. Well, I feel like I could talk to you for like hours and hours about all the things. I have all these like personal questions that I could ask you, but anyway, tell anyone who's listening where they can find you.
Yeah. So you can find me on my website, which is parentingonmars.com. I'm also on Instagram at parentingonmars. And those are the places. Yeah. Let's connect. I'd love to meet you.
Okay, that sounds awesome. I have one more question actually that just popped in my head. Tell us about the name Parenting on Mars. How did you come up with that?
Yes. So my third child, his name is Mars. So.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah, I know.
I
know. I was like, what am I going to name this thing? And I wanted to, I wanted it to be sticky. And I was like thinking, I'm like, should I incorporate my kids' names? And my kids have, some unique names. And so I was like, Mars, Parenting on Mars. It has a couple different meanings. So, right. Yes. We're out here. Like, what planet did I land on? I had no idea parenting would be this way. This isn't what I signed up for. To like a little nod to my third.
That is just that. I love that. I just assumed, of course, that it was, we're a different dimension. Like, this is craziness. And where am I? But I love that. A lot of people ask me, because my business is Olive, You Nanny, and they're always like, do you have a daughter named Olive? I'm like, no, but I definitely should have named my daughter Olive. I know.
Darn it.
I know. Shoot. Missed opportunity.
Yeah.
Anyways, Rachael, thank you so much for being here and connecting. And if anyone has any questions, they can comment. Otherwise, reach out to either of us, and we can always help. So thank you so much, Rachael. Have a good day.